Everyone tonight to our forum. We just got done with the communications, board communications, so if I'm out of breath, it's because I'm not in very good shape. But anyway, my point is that we're going to make sure that we try to go ahead and present some information to you tonight. What we're going to do is Tyler and I are going to tag team it. We want to make sure that we answer your questions, and we're going to go through a slide presentation. But we want to make sure, like I said, that if you have questions, you have the opportunity to ask. There are mics in the back so that you can be heard. If you haven't had a chance, we would like to have you sign in so that you would have that opportunity. But again, what we'd like to do is we'd like to go through some of the information, and I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tyler Holt, who's going to be talking about some of the different things for the bond referendum.
All right, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks to everybody coming out in the big snowstorm. What we want to do tonight, is there an advancer, or we'll just cue Amy? Good. What we want to do tonight is really just provide information. I will start off by saying that we live in an electronic world now, and there are some folks that have already expressed, well, some of us are still in the paper world, but the website has got all of this information. So if we go over something quickly, or if you want to go back, the website is very thorough with all this information. Tonight we want to just I want to start off with just a little bit of a history of where we've been and how did we get here, a little bit about what a bond is, how it will affect our taxpayers, and we want to leave time for questions, okay? The agenda, well, we'll share the board priorities, review the timeline that we've gone over that, and some of the planning efforts. We do have one slide on enrollment projections, which is pretty important for, well, why are we doing what we're doing? And then share the project scope for the proposed bond that's coming up on April 3rd. Talk a little bit about funding and then leave time for Q&A. So as we're going through, you want to take questions as we go, or you want to, we're very informal. So questions as we go, or write them down and we'll take them at the end. So with that, Amy will go to the next slide. What is a bond? Well, general obligation bond is one of really three ways that we can help pay for anything capital. Without going into a lot of detail, the education funding is very much categorical. And so we have Pebble funds, which actually come out of our taxes, which we use for buses, we use for some of the technology, but we can use that for capital. There's a SAVE fund, which comes from the legislator, and that's the penny tax, which is actually in discussion right now to be extended. That can be applied towards capital projects. And then we have general obligation bonds, which is what we're going out for on April 3rd. They're issued and backed by the credit of the school district, but unlike a personal loan, the general obligation bond does not require assets to be used as collateral, so we won't lose our school, or we won't lose all of our band equipment. So that basically is something that we, as the taxpayers, decide whether we want to go forward with. It requires a 60% favorable vote. Okay, so that's on April 3rd. It will require a 60% favorable vote. And there's lots of regulations around what we can and can't do and how we put that out for bid for the bond itself, let alone what we use it for. So there's lots of restrictions. One that I'll mention is that we cannot bond for more than 5% of the total valuation of our entire district, and that's the real estate valuation. So that's really the limitation with what we can do with bonds, okay? All right. Got the background noise. So what have we already done? Well, we already put out a petition, and 25% of the number of people that voted in the last school board election signed that petition. I don't know, Mike, what do we have, 300? Or no, we had 150 or 175 on the petition. Mike Haverdink, Ryan Daling, I think I saw Carol Berge step in. So thank them for their efforts on the bond committee. That came to the school board in January, and in January we then approved to put that out on a ballot, and again that ballot comes out on April 3rd. what are the priorities? So let me back up just a little bit and give you a little bit of history. We sat down in 2015 as a school board and said, we were starting to get questions. Ryan can remember some of those comments, which were, there's all these developments going up in the Gilbert School District. Are we really going to be ready for all of these kids? And in 2015, we put together a task force that said, well, let's start looking at what we think the enrollment might be, and let's just start having that conversation. What that rolled into in 2016 is the board commissioned Hala, architect in Ames, to go through and do a thorough assessment of all of our buildings, to also work on some enrollment projections from an outside source, not just a couple of us with just the numbers that we had. And then we also worked with Piper Jaffray, which is the funding organization that we work with for bonding. And so we were looking at what's our capacity, what do our buildings look like today, what's the enrollment expectations over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and what's our bonding capacity. So those three things went into what we called phase one, which again is on the website. Phase one was in 2016. In that, the school board said, well, here's our priorities for what we would do for projects that come out of that, and that would be, let's make sure we've got the appropriate educational space, and as we're building educational space, let's make sure that it's 21st century. We're not just going to build little square rooms with 25 seats. We want to make sure that we're thinking ahead to how will things be taught in the future. So there's a lot more to that 21st century, but essentially it's looking ahead to what sort of an environment do we want for those kids rather than maybe what we were doing 50 or 100 years ago. Security and comfort, and security has come up. It was at our board meeting again last night. So security is utmost interest and important to us, along with the comfort for what our buildings and what all of our facilities provide for the patrons and for the students. And then we have the extracurricular activities, the athletics, and the fine arts. So those are the priorities. That phase one came to a conclusion and a recommendation to the board that, well, guess what? The elementary school and the intermediate school are actually very functional. These will need some improvements, but at this point, it makes sense to continue to use those. We obviously have a relatively new middle school and a brand new high school. So the assessments there were more of matching the enrollment projections with what we have for bonding capacity. So the outcome of phase one was a recommendation to not build a new elementary school, but instead to address all the other needs that the district has across multiple different projects that you're going to see tonight. So that kicked off then phase two, which was just this last year in 2017, in which Hala went through with many different groups across the community. I sat in on some voc ag ones. I know there was different, each building had one. There was an athletic, there was a fine arts, and they worked through, well, what really are our needs, and what does that look like within the district priorities that we've got here. So that's basically where we came up with the list in November of last year as an outcome of phase two that said, here are the projects that we really feel we need to address. We need to address now. And if we do these, we still have funding capacity. We still have bonding capacity to build a new elementary school in 8 or 10 years. We still have bonding capacity to expand in other areas. So this was thought through, again, with those three things in mind. What are the facility capacity and status? What's the enrollment projections? And what's the bonding capacity? And I think there's one more slide here, then I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay. This one shows enrollment projections, and Hala and our administrative team worked with a third-party IFSIS, which I couldn't tell you what exactly that stands for. But they do enrollment projections all around the state, and I think they're even beyond the state borders. They also do some financial planning. We did not commission them for that. Basically, in the blue bars are running across from all the way back to 1997, you can see the enrollment. And the enrollment over the last 30 years in Gilbert is running at about 2.25% growth. Some years it's closer to 0 or 1. A couple of those years it was closer to 8%. The last 10 years, it's running at about 3%. when we went to this IFSIS group and said, well, help us with what your projections are, interestingly enough, their projections are actually in the green and the red bars for the next 10 years, in which they projected Gilbert to be a little bit over between 1 and 2% growth. And we said, well, the last 10 years, we've been averaging over 3. We had long discussions about, well, why might that be? And there's a lot of factors that go into just the demographics of the county, the economics of the county, the homes that are currently in the district. Even though we're building a lot of them, there's a lot of homes that are now transitioning out. The Haverdanes used to have 3 in the district, and they've got 1. The Holks have 1, and they'll add 3, and they'll be down to 0 this fall. So these houses are not being filled with kids. So they factor all of that in, and their estimates are in the red and the green. What the board decided to do was to be more conservative from the standpoint of what if it grows faster than what they expect, and we put out a 3%, or actually a 3.25% estimate out 10 years. So that's what we're actually using, is faster than what's projected growth. We're also on the bonding side using projections that are slower valuation than what has been happening. So we're conservative on both sides, and the model still works for all that we plan to do with this bond if it passes. We won't talk about it tonight, but everything you see tonight is rolled into a $14 million bond. That bond would happen over the next couple, 2-3 years. Those projects would happen. And that allows us to continue to grow our valuation. And if we needed to build an elementary school in 6 or 8 years, the projections are that our bonding capacity will fully be there. So the district is growing. It's hard to estimate where it's going to be at. At one point, we thought it would be growing much faster. The estimates are around 1.5 to 2%. But the fact is, our bonding valuation continues to go up. So from that standpoint, we'll be in good shape. If it grows faster than this, the valuation will be there as well. So we can go into a lot more detail, and if there's questions at the end that deal with either enrollment or the valuation, we can talk about that in more detail. But I think you want to see a little bit more of what are actually the projects that we're going to be doing, and Lindsay's going to go through that.
Thanks, Tyler. As you can tell when Tyler was talking about this isn't something that we've just done overnight. This isn't something that we've just done within the past 3 months. There's been a lot of work and a lot of effort that's been put into this, and a lot of input from the different people in our communities and in the district. What I'm going to talk about is some of the things that will be happening at each of the different buildings. Now, I'm going to put it at a pretty high level. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. If you want to get into some detail and want to see some of the different things, you can go to our website and you get a lot of detail about that. And we will try to answer any questions that you have at the end. But I'm going to take the elementary school first of all. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at both at the elementary and the intermediate is secure entry. It'll be a little bit different. We're going to kind of use the same model that we have here at the high school. And what would happen is, as you come into the high school building, you come through the doors, actually they buzz you in right now. You come in and you have to go through the office area before you can go into the rest of the building. This will be the same situation here as far as when a person wants to come into this building, they will come in and they will have to go ahead and they will be coming into the office area. You may say, well, the office area, that's down a ways from where when you come into the building. We're moving what would be Stacy's office more towards, it's actually on the one side of the lunchroom area. And what we'll do is we'll glass in an area so people, when they come in, they'll come into this entryway, they'll come into the high school, or excuse me, they'll come into the elementary office, and then they'll sign in as if they're a visitor or if they're making a presentation or what have you. We feel, and this is something that we've talked about before, the different things that have gone on, whether it be today or a couple weeks ago. We feel it's very, very important to have a secure entrance. Right now, they do have a little bit different setup. What will happen is they had a camera. What would happen is the secretaries would buzz them in, and we felt that we could make some improvements on that. So we'll be looking at doing that. Another thing that we'll be looking at is HVAC. heating, cooling, and ventilation. And those are some things when you get a building that is the advantage of our elementary. And it's a good building. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but there's some things that we need to improve on. And when and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because again, HVAC doesn't, make people have goosebumps. But the biggest thing is that what it does is it allows your son or daughter to be in that building and to be comfortable and have good ventilation. So those are some things that we're going to be looking at the elementary. You want to go ahead and change it? If we take a look at the intermediate building, in Amy's building, we're looking at the situation again, a secure entrance. We've talked about that. Actually, had some discussions last night at the board meeting about that, and just some more detail about what we're looking at. Again, what will happen is everyone will be funneled into the office area. That way, we have the proper identification of who's here, why they're here, and then they can go ahead and go into the building. Another thing that we have at the intermediate building is there are 3 classrooms that we're going to update and do some things that would be some HVAC mechanical things. If you think of the intermediate building, they are on the southwest portion. There's 3 science rooms there. And when we did our renovation of that, when we moved our intermediate into that building, those were 3 rooms that we really didn't do much as far as touching. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to make sure that we go into those rooms. We're going to modernize them. They were older science classrooms. They had lab tables, things like that. And we're going to make it so that it's more appropriate for our intermediate students on those rooms. The other part we'll look at, if you think of that building, the band and vocal areas, what we're looking at doing there is there's some things that we need to do as far as some ventilation there. We need to, I know they're going to do some work on some of the ceilings and just to make sure, that's probably the older part of that building, isn't that right, Amy, as far as of your building down there? And we want to make sure that we do some upgrading there. There's some things that we're going to do some things to make sure that the proper ventilation and proper heating and cooling are in that area. You want to go to the next slide? As we take a look at the middle, and we're going to take a look at middle and high, but I wanted to make sure that you're aware of something. When the middle was built and when the high school was built, they were built for expansion, all right? There was thought process that when they were put together, and it was built so that when the day would come when we would need to go ahead and take a look at expansion, we could go ahead and do that. So if you take a look at this, the area that we see down here, the number 1, that's an area that is, we're looking at a 4 classroom addition there. That would be off the south side. As you're driving by, that would be shooting out towards the highway. Again, as Tyler mentioned, we're trying to look at these rooms not as maybe what it was like when, I'll just say when I was in school, where there were, desks and rows and it was a box. We're going to try to look at some flexibility there. We're going to try to look at 21st century learning and make sure that some of those things, flexible seatings, doing different things rather than what was maybe a traditional classroom for you and I, it'll be a little bit different in these. We're also looking at, if you take a look at the number 2 up there, we have a situation, we have a great thing that's happening at Gilbert as we continue to grow. But as we continue to grow, we need more space. And if you've been over to the middle school and had an opportunity to see the locker room area, we'll have like 50 to 60 kids go out for boys basketball. And that's great. We want to have kids going out. We have larger class sizes for PE. The reason I'm telling you that is our locker rooms are not built to hold that. And we feel that this is something that we need to go ahead and address. We want to make sure that people are able to participate. If we get people participating in things, they like to be in school. They like to be a part of that. So whether it be PE, whether that be extracurricular activities, we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to enlarge the locker rooms. What we will do is, if you've been in that area, there's kind of a little weight room area or whatever that you might want to call it. What's going to happen is that's going to go away, and they're going to enlarge those locker rooms. And what will happen is there will be, it would be on the west side of the building, we're going to add a multi-purpose room and a vestibule there so that we could go ahead. First of all, we're using that entrance on that west side in the wrong way. That was never meant to be a main entrance where kids would come in and out. That's the way it's being used. What happens is kids will come into that building and they're coming from being in the parking lot right onto the basketball court. Not a good situation as far as wear and tear on that. The other thing is, when we take a look at that multi-purpose room, that will allow us to go ahead and expand some of these classes that we have. I think we're 130, don't quote me, about 132 in a couple of the classes that we're looking at the middle. And as we look at that, we're able to go ahead and some of those PE classes that we're looking at, we're able to have a couple different areas that we can go ahead and expand that. The vestibule, you may say, well, why are you looking at doing that? One of the things that if you're have a middle school child, you have to pick them up. You have to go and you have to make sure, we're getting there at the right time. What this will allow us to do is, as those kids are done, they have now, hopefully, as they have the opportunity, they will have the locker rooms that are adequately sized. They will be able to go ahead and have the opportunity, once they're done, to wait inside and watch for mom or dad to pick them up. Now it's a little bit different. They're using that one side door or they're using the main entrance. So what we have tried to do is we tried to go ahead and combine those so that it makes it very functional. And that's one of the things I want to make sure everyone realizes. As we're looking at this, and Tyler talked about, we kind of looked at a couple different options as we tried to look at the overall projects. These projects that we're talking about, we hit every building. We hit every building. There's something that's happening there, and it may be to a little bit different degree, but every building is being hit. You want to go ahead and change it? Okay, we're going to talk about the high school. Let me move my papers around because there's a couple things that I want you to realize on the high school that I think are very interesting. Again, we're in what I feel is a great opportunity for our district because we are growing. And so as we look at this, we want to make sure that we are offering the different things that we need. And if you take a look at number 2, we're talking about a band or fine arts improvement. I'll give you an example. In 2012 and 13, 62 kids were in high school band. Today, and this number may be low, today we have 127. So we went from 62 to 127. That's a huge, huge gain. If you've had an opportunity to be in that band room when they have all those kids in there, it's like, where are we going to put them all? All right? It's an opportunity that we need to make sure that we're offering our kids, and that is that we need to go ahead and enlarge that area to accommodate the growth of that program. The other thing that we look at is that there's a classroom settings that will be on number 1, and there's 2 vocational, there's a vocational lab area. We're looking at expanding the shop, if you want to say the industrial tech area. Here's an example of how that's grown. In the past 7 years, it's gone from 220 students being enrolled there to 342. So we're looking at classroom additions on number 1 and trying to make sure that we have that taken care of. I think there's an art room and there are 2 other rooms. I don't know if Vic's here. I don't know that they've necessarily determined what those rooms will be specifically. But I guess the main part of it is the growth that we're seeing in, whether it be the fine arts, the growth that we're seeing in the vocational area, the industrial tech. The vocational area, one of the things that we will be using one of those rooms, we're going to call it a vocational tech flex room. So we'll be able to do some different things in there and be able to use it maybe in a little bit different way. Right now, and I think there's some high school teachers in here, we don't have a lot of spare rooms that you guys have out there, do you?
We don't have any spare rooms.
If you didn't hear that, she said we don't have any.
I'm sharing a classroom.
Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we answer some of the concerns that are out there and make sure that we offer to our kids some of the different needs that they have. You want to go ahead and change it, Amy? Another area that we're looking at is the athletics area. And if you take a look at this, you can see the overall projects. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the intermediate track. Intermediate track needs some tender loving care. All right, what we use that for is we have large numbers out for track. So what we will do is we will go ahead and do some repair and resurfacing in some of the areas so that the middle schoolers will have an opportunity to practice there. You may say, well, why don't they practice over on the main track that we have? We already have a ton of kids out for high school. So we're trying to use both of those facilities. It's a safety issue is what it comes down to. Another thing that we're looking at is to go ahead and repair and improve the current baseball and softball fields. I don't know, I know that we've had great luck from our booster clubs and things like this, but we need to do some things here too, safety-wise, to make sure that we accommodate this so that we meet some of the standards that are out there for handicapped accessible and things along this line, and make sure that it's safe. Another thing that we're looking at is competition-sized practice soccer fields north of the middle school. And you can take a look at that up there. We talked about the fact of, the thing that's nice about Gilbert is we are a district and a community that work together. And we're trying to work together. There's a ton of kids that love to play soccer. There's a ton of kids that love to play school soccer and a variety of soccer. And what we're looking at doing here is we're looking at the growth that we're having, and we're going to try to accommodate that by that practice soccer field that would be up in the northeast portion of this. You can see where the field's at. Another thing that we're looking at, and we talked about this in a lot of detail, the baseball and the softball field that we have are in the situation where they are used from morning to night. All right, they are used and used and used, and trying to get the opportunity for kids to be able to play as many games as possible. We're looking at adding a new baseball and softball field to the existing complex. And you can kind of see where it talks about here, where those would be. Again, this will allow us to go ahead and to offer those opportunities for the kids so that it's not all these on two fields, so that we can spread this out and use this as efficiently as possible. Amy, you want to go ahead and switch it? Okay. This usually is a topic that comes up and people want to know a little bit about what's going to happen here. So, one of the things that I talk to people about when I talk about taxes, I want to make sure that we're very, very transparent about what we're looking at here. As you know, when you look at property tax, there are different things that are included in on that. They could be payments to city, township, it could be county, it could be community college, or it could be school district. The thing that we have available is the fact that we as a school district are going to keep our rate at the rate that it's at. We have a debt levy that's at $4.05, and that rate will not change. Now, I can't tell you what's going to happen with the county, or I can't tell you what's going to happen with the community college, but we do have the capabilities of dictating, and the school board will be looking at that. We're going to keep that level at where it's at right now, and you can kind of take a look at that. We're also, what's going to be happening is, if the bond passes, it talks about it right here, the 405 tax rate will be extended through the 2038. So what we're doing is we're actually taking that rate and we're extending that out approximately 5 more years. And you can take a look at this as far as the overall assessed value. I think Gail put this together. If you wanted to kind of take a look at where things are at, the thing that I think is most important that we're looking at, that we control, is right here. 405 is going to be that levy. And we're going to keep it that way. The board has made it that they are going to try to keep that as constant as they possibly can. We can't raise it anymore. And we're going to keep it as constant as we possibly can. You want to switch it, Amy? Again, you can see that the tax rate and the forecast for the new bond issue, we're going to be keeping that at that 1890 range and trying to make sure that we keep that at a level rate. Go ahead to the next one that you had there, Amy. There's a lot of information out there. And if you don't get, the opportunity tonight is to ask any questions that you might have. This is our website. And if you take a look at it, the bond vote, April 3rd, I think that if you don't know this, polls will open at 7 o'clock and they will close at 8 p.m. It's the Gilbert Lutheran Church. And if you want to know some of the different things, Amy, can you go ahead and show them what happens if they click on that? Here's information about the bond. Here's information. It talks, when Tyler was talking about our phase 1 report and our phase 2 report, that's going back and talking about what was the discussion, why did these people come up with this idea, and how did they come up with this idea. If you take a look at it, there's also the situation where it talks about the elementary school project in detail. If you wanted to click on that, you can see it in a lot more detail than I just gave you. My point is that, and I have to make sure that I use this statement. Our goal tonight, when Tyler and I are talking, is we're here to give the facts. We're not here to say vote this way or that way. We're here to give the facts. Now, there are some people I think that might be, if you'd like to talk to later on, that might be, wanting to talk to you about some different things. That's fine, but our goal tonight is to talk about the overall impact that this will have, what are we looking at doing, and why are we doing it. Amy, do we have anything else that we have there? I think that the biggest thing that we'd like to do now is to open it up to questions. Again, I think that we'll probably try to tag team this. If you have a question, we would ask that you would go ahead, and I don't know if that one's on or not, is it, Jason? Or I can turn it on too. If you have a question, just come on up to the mic and ask, and we'll try to answer it. If we don't have the answer today, we'll try our darndest to make sure that we get it to you and that we get your questions answered. So, questions.
Yeah.
So, just real quick, we've talked about student growth as far as the population and adding on to the buildings for the most part, plus a few other little things. And so what my question is I didn't hear any comments, and maybe I missed them because I was late, apologize, but in regard to student facilities regarding restrooms and lunchrooms and things like that, do any of those areas need to be addressed, or are they part of it and I just don't know the detail?
So the question is on sort of the core components of the buildings, correct?
Yes.
So you talk about lunchroom, you talk about some of the other facilities. And in these projects, there will be some restoration of some restrooms and such, but that is not part of the project because the middle school and this high school were built for expansion. So part of our challenge with building these two buildings was, well, we built them with a much larger core, food facility, restrooms, et cetera, much larger core than what we actually needed for the capacity for the students at that time. So that's why we can go to the middle school now and add on 4 classrooms and we'll be fine. That's why we can put on the equivalent of 4 classrooms here. And in fact, we're going to go probably to 8 in a few more years. So we built the middle school and the high school with strong core that can expand quite a bit. So the next steps for these two buildings will really be in classrooms, and you won't see it for food and such. I think we talked about the classrooms needing to double before we might have to expand the commons and look at that. But essentially, the core of these buildings will really be the capacity that they'll be able to go to long term. Does that address your question?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Good question.
Omar.
So, Tyler, a couple of times when you were talking about the elementary school, you said, we will have enough bonding capacity if we need to do something in the six to 8 years.
Yep.
Are there plans to replace the elementary school in 6 to 8 years? And my other question is, you talked about the high school. We're adding 2 classrooms right now, right? Well,
The
2
equivalent of-
classrooms and then vocational.
Yep.
The equivalent of 4.
But then you just mentioned that, we might be able to add another
Yep.
2 or 4 in the next few years.
Yep.
Was that considered to
Yep.
add
Yep.
more than 2 right now instead of coming back and doing something in 2 to 4 years?
Yep.
Thank you.
And I know that you had asked Tyler that. I'll just briefly give you my spin on it, and I'll let him answer it also. One of the things that we did want to make sure of is that we have not shut any doors with our elementary. So we're looking at the fact of, we were trying to determine what would be an appropriate time that we would be looking at that elementary. And we can look at that 8 to 10. We can look at that a little bit sooner if we need to. We wanted to make sure that we have the bonding capacity, because if things start to explode, we're not a Waukee, but we're a very fast-growing district. What they say, the 8th fastest, in the state. So my point is that we are looking at, we're not closing the door, we're not just having tunnel vision here. We are looking at the fact of we may be looking at needing that elementary, but we don't know. We feel that we can look at it in that 8 to 10 years, but we want to make sure that we have the capacity to do the things that we need to do with that.
Yeah, so there's a lot packed into those questions, Omar. And I'll try to keep it brief, but then ask more questions if we need to unpack it more. Let's start with the elementary. That was really the whole focus of that 2016 phase 1 was, should we invest more into this elementary school or should it be sunset? And the conclusion we came to was we should invest and get some more years out of it. The decision has not been made to tear that elementary school down in 6 or 8, 10 years. That will be for the school board in a few years to continue to assess the capabilities of that building. But what we did decide was, well, with this bond, we would invest about $1 million into that. That would easily get us out 10 years if we need to go 10 years or even longer. The facility itself, or the space itself, is, we talked about that as well. So in other words, we made that decision. Well, we're gonna invest in the current facility, and that facility, we've been told, with these investments would be good for 6, 8, 10, 12 years, depending upon what our enrollment looks like, and then assess it at that point. Also in that conversation was, well, what about that site? Because there was a lot of feedback, and Lindsay heard it over and over again, was, no, that's where the elementary school needs to be. So if you're building a new one, it needs to be there. And so we took that into account in all of this planning already in phase 1, which would be, well, if we were to do that either now or in 10 years, is that space capable of doing that? And it is. So that general planning has already been put onto paper, which would be, well, you'd build a new elementary school immediately beside that one and then tear the old one down at some point. Again, I don't want to commit the board into the future with that's going to be in 6 or 8 or 10 or however many years. But what we did was an assessment of the buildings, and we're told that's a good building and it's worth putting $1 million into and keeping it for another however long you need it. So that's kind of the elementary. Your question on my talking about the high school is, we did look at it. In fact, and Deb Ordal is here, and I don't know if there's any other board members, but Deb is here, and if you want to comment, please do. We looked at doing what's the equivalent in this bond of 4 classrooms, but they're 21st century, they're project-based. They're not the traditional, here's 25 seats. So that's the vocab, that's the art, that's this training center. Those are the equivalent of 4 classrooms. We looked at the potential of doing 8. And could we have, yeah, it would have increased this bond a little bit more, but our question was, is there any advantage to doing 8 now from a cost saving standpoint rather than doing 4, which is what we think we'll need over the next few years, and then doing 4 more later? And the conclusion was, there's no substantial cost advantage for doing those all 8 now. And what we felt, being prudent financially, was, well, then let's not do all 8 now, because we felt like we might get some pretty strong feedback of, you got all these empty classrooms that we just paid for, why do you have empty classrooms? So the approach from the board is we're going to build as we need, and without going into the valuation component, which is also part of that question, the valuation is there. In fact, we voted to approve this list to go to the bond in January. Don't remember the date, the 15th, around the 15th. At the end of that month is when we got the valuation for the previous year. And valuation, just so you know, Piper Jaffray only allows us to use 2% and project forward on 2%. We've been averaging 7%, and last year it was 9.5% valuation growth in our district. What that means is we put out for $14 million bond, that's what we're proposing for the community. And our capacity was something like 16 or 18, so there was still some room. But just by that valuation going up 9.5%, that's $3 million more in bonding capacity. So, you know, you can extract that forward and know that as the growth is there, the valuation will be there and there will be more funding. So, yes, we're confident with the forecast that we can build additional high school rooms when we need it, and we can build a new elementary school in 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 years whenever the board at that time deems it's appropriate. Long answer, it didn't even cover all of the nuances, but is that good? Okay. Other questions? Joe, you gotta have some questions. He does. Joe Metzger was involved, or Lance, good. Joe Metzger was involved way back 5, 6 years ago when we were continuing to try to track all the enrollment. So appreciate your efforts back
it is an enrollment question. When I looked at the enrollment in the past,
yep,
it kind of surprised me, but the middle school, especially the high school, grows a lot faster than the elementary. With the last round of professionals doing the enrollment forecasting, did you see the same thing?
We did. We didn't have to pay for them. We should have just kept it with you. So we did, and in fact, that's something that's kind of unique to our district. There's 2 factors there, and there's probably more, but one is St. Cecilia, and this year, do you know how many came in? But there's a considerable number of
19?
19 genders.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that funnels into the middle school, right? Not into the intermediate, not into the elementary. The other is our open enrollment, which we continue to have those discussions. To keep it really short, open enrollment is something that the board sets as a matrix, working with the administrative team on, well, how many kids what's the teacher to student or student to teacher ratio that we want to have? And we lock that in, so we won't accept open enrollment if it's going to now put more students per teacher. So if it starts compromising that ratio, we'll stop the open enrollment. And that's grade by grade. Well, that really dictates what that kindergarten class looks like. And so what will happen is when we get to that point, currently we're at 5 sections for, I think, every grade. Is that?
Hey, Amy, do you have one? You have one section in your building that's 4?
One. So
okay.
There's one section that's 4, and all the rest, K through 12, are 5 sections. When we get to that point where kindergarten now needs to have a 6th section, that will actually open up some open enrollment to fill the rest of that class in, and then that will start funneling through the entire district. So then we go to a 6th section per grade, and that's where the growth goes. So right now, the elementary and the intermediate have actually not been growing. Since we went to a 4-building system 4 years ago, the elementary's actually gone down a couple kids in enrollment. The intermediate has gone up about 10. The middle school was in the mid-40s or 50s, and the high school at 60. So the growth in students has been in the middle school and the high school. And that's what you projected, and that's what IFSIS continues to project. You could also talk about, well, what's the valuation of the homes that are being built in the district, and some discussion about, are those for starter homes or not, and that kind of dictates the age of the kids that you got too. So we're committed to working with IFSIS every year on updating that projection, and it's not just a projection for the whole K-12, it's by grade.
Thank you.
Yep. Lance.
I have 3 questions, actually. The first is security, and Lindsay, you spoke to that a little bit.
Yep.
And so I'd like to know a little bit around, are you going to be key fobbed, pass protected? What are you doing with your doors? What's changing, what's not? Is there, there's all kinds of technology today around that.
You're right.
It's a lot different even when we built the high school.
Mhm.
First one. The second one, the high school, the ag piece on number 2, and then there's a classroom. How many classrooms in the high school are you adding? I guess this question.
I believe it was 4.
4 classrooms, okay. Yeah, the last one I was curious about is resurfacing the old track.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a complete resurface or going?
Tim, I'm going to defer a little bit. I think what it is, it's, and I'll defer to you, then I start to answer. What I think is going to happen is that there's going to be some patchwork done, and then there may be some stretches where they might do some resurfacing. Do you know, Tim?
There are parts where the asphalt is buckling. Those parts will be cut out and replaced. And then the actual surface will have a respray on it, which will, the cracks will all be filled in and it'll look like a brand new surface. And that's much cheaper than replacing the entire thing.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but what we're doing is like a $60,000 to $100,000 project. To resurface was $250,000 or more, and a new track was $750,000.
And that's a safety situation there, so that we, if you walk out there now, there's some things that we need to, like I said, to have some tender loving care with that. That's what we're going to do with it, and I think we're going to do it in an economical way.
So we're actually going with the lowest of those. It is a track that is used today, and it'll continue to get used because, as Lindsay said, the middle schoolers go over there. But it's not a complete resurface.
Is there a time frame estimate that you're giving on that?
Well, the question is, how many times can you do this, really, right? So they're saying 6 to 10 years on what we're doing now, and then I think the district will need to decide whether you go all the way down to the base, and that's the $250,000. And at that point, it's, well, what's the size of the district, and what are the needs? You want to address the security question?
Yeah. One of the things that we're finding out is, and Lance, that's a great question, that with the way society is, the things that are happening, there's a lot of different things out there for security measures. We want to make sure that that what we're doing is that well, first of all, I'll take a step backwards. We are working with the Story County Sheriff's Department and trying to look at some of the best alternatives that we can have for security in our overall buildings in general. What we're looking at doing, though, is we're looking at having these areas where, just like we do in the high school, where they are coming in to this building, they would have to go ahead and they could not go any further. Those second set of doors are locked. They would have to go ahead and funnel into the high school. We are looking at our middle school. We're looking at trying to change those to a fob system. There's some doors that we need to upgrade there. I think Jason's been doing some work on that as far as getting some estimates for that. We want to try to go ahead and see at our middle school. Another thing that we're doing at our middle school is the fact that our middle school setup is a little bit different than any of the other buildings. And when I say a little bit different, the reason I say that is, if you take a look at the intermediate building, if you take a look at the elementary building, it's pretty easy, or it's somewhat easy, to funnel people through the actual office. What we have at the middle school is we don't have that ease, because as you come in there, as you realize, you got the lunchroom, the commons area over here, you got the different academic wings. What we're going to look at doing is, and I know that Mike's getting some estimates on that right now, is the fact that what we will do is we will go ahead, those doors will be locked, and they'll buzz in somewhat similar to what we're doing at the elementary. We're trying to make sure that we are staying as up to date as possible. I know that when we talked to Captain Thomas from Story County, he said, things are changing rapidly. When we talked to Hala, they said there's a lot of things out there, and you want to make sure that as you're looking at these, that you're looking at the best options that you can have. I mean, I've had people say, well, when you glass in that area, is that going to be bulletproof glass that's in the elementary? No, it's not. It's going to be a glassed area, and we're going to go ahead and funnel people in. I hope that, God forbid, that we never have to worry about bulletproof glass in our elementary. My point is that we're going to try to go ahead and make sure that we are dictating how those people are coming in and what way they're coming in.
I'm going to pick on Deb since she's talking right now, but if you want to comment Oh, so Deb Ordall's on the school board, and we had another good conversation about safety last night. And Deb, if you want to comment, please do. But Amanda Lepper came in, and a parent in our district, and talked about facilities. So the question tonight is about facilities, which clearly we're working towards, well, what's the most appropriate things that we can do for safety in the facilities. But she also talked about the procedures that we have going on in the schools. So what are our armed intruder drills that we do? What are our procedures? Because those are as important as anything. She also talked about how do we handle violent threats, and working, as Lindsay said, with the law enforcers and such, because that's also part of the issue. And the fourth thing, so she talked about facilities, programs, or policies, how to handle threats, and the fourth one was just the issue about guns in homes. And that I think a statistic, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 1/3 of the shootings are guns that are coming from home, or was it even more than that? Yeah, so safety is the utmost issue or importance for us, and facilities is a component, but it's really come back to working with the administrative team on what are our policies and what are our drills and what do we have in place for once there is a threat that we're working with the law enforcement to handle that appropriately. So there's a multifaceted approach to safety in addition to the facilities. It's just what I wanted to comment on. Yeah, another question.
If this bond doesn't pass, is there money available to do any parts of these projects?
What will happen is, matter of fact, it's a good question. We talked about this actually last night at our board meeting. April 3rd is the bond. If the bond does not pass, and that has to pass by 60%, all right, everyone realizes that. If that doesn't pass, what I've heard the board talk about last night is the fact that there are areas that we're going to go ahead and we're going to address, and those will be the ones that we're looking at that would, if it would pass the bond, that would be happening this summer, and that would be the secure entrances in both the elementary and the intermediate. I know that one of the things that they said was we might have to put on hold and we'd be paying for that by PEPL, by the way, in case you're wondering, you know, why do you all of a sudden, where's this coming from? What we would be looking at is probably putting on hold right now the renovations to those classrooms that are the science classrooms. Is that, you want to go ahead and add?
Yep. I think that covers it. So safety has been a discussion we've had ongoing for a long time. And in fact, we talked about these entries. We would likely go forward with those. We'd have to use a different funding structure, which would compromise other things. As I talked about at the beginning, this is all categorical funding. So if we do have to use PEBL rather than a bond, that could compromise our transportation, our technology, a lot of the other things that come out of the fund that we call PEBL. The rest, everything else, no, there wouldn't be any money to do any of the rest.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Deb's got a good one.
My question might be a little bit safety related, but again, with the growing expansion of the sizes of classes and everything, do we still just have one guidance counselor at the high school? And is there any thought to adding guidance counselor at the high school?
The answer to your question is, let's take a step back for a second. There is a guidance counselor that is at the elementary. There's one at the intermediate. And I should say, because I think that we have the label there, guidance / at risk, you know, whatever you want to say there. We have one at the middle and one at the high. We've also tried to go ahead and answer some of the needs that we have at the high, because you heard, we're kind of unusual because we're growing at the middle and we're growing at the high. You would have thought it would have been intermediate and elementary. What we're trying to do is we're trying to use our at-risk funding. We have a person that is, I believe, 75% that is at the high school that is an at-risk person to help out with that guidance. Those are some of the things that we're going to be dealing with as we continue to grow. All right, and if you can go ahead and talk to your legislators, I can say this part of it. If you can talk to your legislators and that they can help us out in any way, 1% is not a lot of money to give us as we try to go ahead and keep things rolling. But to answer your question, yes, we are trying to go ahead and do some different things with that and trying to accommodate you know, down the road, that might be something that we'd have to look at. But again, it's overall, and we have an at-risk person that's there the majority of the time.
You want to just,
Go ahead.
so just piggybacking on that, the funding, I think everyone is probably fully aware, but the funding for teacher salaries and for additional staff is a completely different fund. So what we're talking about here is general obligation bond, Pebble, potentially save money, and you can't use any of that to hire teachers, to pay your teachers anymore. That's all coming from this allowable growth, which, yeah, that's a conversation down in Des Moines, because we had that conversation at the board meeting too. You can't go on too many more years with 1% without starting to compromise your student-to-teacher ratio. You just can't. About 80% of our expenses on our general fund is for teachers and their benefits and the staff. So if healthcare goes up, what was healthcare estimates last night, Deb? 13%, and we're trying to figure out how to make that 7%. But the healthcare for the staff is going up that much. How can you do it with 1%? But that's a different conversation for a different day. Just to be clear, that's not anything we can do with capital money.
That's a good point, because sometimes people don't realize that what you're using those general fund dollars are for different than the general obligation that we're talking about. And again, you know, there's some things that have popped up. Tyler mentioned this when we were talking about just different things. I was surprised when people started talking about the elementary, and if we do that down the road, like I said, we're putting in right around $1 million there. People said, well, you know, we're talking about, should we move this in some of the small groups? No, don't do that. We like that community feel. We like where it's at. So, you know, and I hope you realize that one of the things that we did was we just didn't sit in a room and try to think up what are some projects that are out there. We really talked to a lot of different people. We had elementary group, we had an intermediate, we had a middle, we had a high, we had a fine arts, we had athletics, we had vocational, and those were multiple meetings. And Tyler brought up another good point, is the fact that, you know, when we were looking at this, should we be looking at X amount of classrooms at the high school, or should we be looking at maybe a bigger number? And I think that we're trying to be very prudent with taxpayers' dollars and making sure that we are keeping our options open so that we don't shut any doors, that we are trying to, you know, when we heard from one of our high school teachers back here, we don't have any rooms, we need more rooms. We're trying to accommodate that. When we talk about some of the things over at the middle school too, and I talked to Mike Danielson, and he talks about, you know, is it our 6th or 7th grade has 132 in there? That's the highest one that we have in the district. Those are great things that are happening, but we're trying to accommodate that, and the way that we're trying to do that is through the many different projects that you're hearing tonight. That's what I hope that everyone, if you take something away, we're not trying to zero in, you know, when I first came to this district, you built a middle school. It's a great facility. I was here to help with the high school, and again, a great facility. This is a little bit different because we're doing projects at each of those 4 different buildings. And we've had input from a variety of people and a variety of groups. And again, we just want to make sure that you understand what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and if you have questions, please ask. I mean, you can go to the website. I know that we've talked about, you can go to the website and shoot a question to us, and we'll get back to you. I promise you. I promise you that we will get back to you, and we will get back to you soon if you have a question. If you want to, you know, email us or give us a call or whatever, I want to make sure that people understand why we're doing the things that we're doing.
Good.
Are there any other questions that are out there?
Oh, good. This is going to be bonus points, right?
Is this extra credit?
No.
Oh, okay.
So with the secure entries, I understand you're kind of basing all of the other buildings off of the high school, and so you're not really addressing anything at the high school because it's obviously like the basis. But there's a new security policy that just got put into place a month ago where students or anybody coming during the day has to ring a bell and then the secretaries buzz you in. And the issue with that is that there's hundreds of students coming and going throughout the day, And so I was just wondering if you had been thinking about any like alternatives or any way to fix that, because on both the student side, there's plenty of students who have gotten tardies for classes because there was nobody in the office at the time that was able to buzz them in, and secretaries, it feels like all they're doing all day is buzzing people in.
Yeah.
So I just wondered if you had thought about that at all.
One of the things, and your question is a great question, if you do get extra credit, make sure your teacher gives you a lot of extra credit. The fact of it is what we tried to do, and it is a little bit of an inconvenience, the way that we're handling that at the high school. It used to be that you could go ahead and come in the first set of doors, sign in, and now what we put in is that camera out there, and they have to buzz you in. And she's right. It is an inconvenience. It's an inconvenience probably for the students, and I hope that if you get a tardy or whatever, that's taken care of, because that's not your fault. And also, what we're trying to do, though, is we're trying to get this as secure as possible with the overall building. And I can't tell you how many different people I've either talked to or had emails from, and they want to be assured that their son or daughter is safe here. And I listened to Tyler say this last night at the board meeting, and he's exactly right. He said, we've always had policies for secure entrance and things like that. We've modified those a little bit, and we may need to modify the one that you're talking about so that we do get a little bit of a better flow. But we're also trying to get that balance. You see what I'm saying? We're trying to get the balance of having that flow and not having to stand out there and wait, or the secretary isn't in the office and you have to wait, to also making it secure. So we will work and try to do our very best to make sure that we get that as feasible as possible. And again, I think you should get extra credit. Any other questions? No, you're fine. We could have brought it over to you, actually.
Yeah, hi. I'm not very familiar with your budgeting and how you can allocate funds from what bucket to spend where, so I'll preface with that. But looking at your priority slide, you had academia and infrastructure first, and you had athletics third. So I'm curious as to why we're doing one large bond. Why not have an option where you had the academia and infrastructure as an option A, athletics as an option B, and when do the boosters financing come in? How does that all work? Because I know that others that I know have that same question. Why do we have to vote on, if I like infrastructure, why do I have to say yes to some of the athletic enhancements as well? Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to try to take a shot at that, and then I'm going to give Tyler a chance to take a shot at it too. What you're talking about is right up here, what Amy brought back up, and that's the district priorities. And as we were looking at those, we wanted to make sure that we just didn't limit ourselves to just a particular area, that we knew that there was going to be things that we would have to have, and there would have to be the educational space, security and comfort, and activities and fine arts. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that we are able to hit those areas of need, and these areas of need were pocketed or put into an overall project. Now, one of the things that we do have, and I'll put them up against anyone, we have tremendous athletic boosters, we have tremendous fine arts boosters, and they help us out in any way possible, all right? But when we're talking about some of the things like this, when some of these higher dollars, we don't have, they don't have the capabilities of doing that. That's why we have to go out to you as a public and ask for that. But I think that some of the things that we're looking at is we're putting these into a project too, and you're starting to look at using your construction dollars or your general obligation dollars. You try to tie those together so that you're doing not just one project and then 2 years later you're bringing them back. You're trying to get some of that cost savings that you may have by bringing them all in together at once.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add. That covers it pretty well. On the funding, the boosters do support, Tim maybe has the numbers at the tip of his tongue, but a lot of the, like the jerseys, a lot of the different road trips and such, I mean, a lot of that gets paid for out of the boosters, right? Which then allows us to use money from the general fund for other things. So there's considerable amount of support for both the athletics and the fine arts boosters. But when you start talking about building an auditorium, which we did 5 years ago, well, fine arts boosters just aren't going to be able to raise $3.5 million. right? They're just not going to be able to do that. So at that point, it becomes a responsibility of the district. I'd say that the board works tirelessly about what are our priorities and what does this list look like. If you look at the individual lines, what is there, Deb? 16, 18, 20? And there were 35. So, I mean, we did a lot of discussion and prioritization. We came up with a list as a board that we said, this is what's best for the district from our standpoint. And we want to put it out as a bond, and we want to keep this fairly straightforward for the community. In other words, there's lots of things in here, which, yeah, I guess you could go out and divvy those up, but that would make it very complicated, and it would make it, you would be doing a bond very frequently to address it that way. So we wanted to keep it fairly straightforward, comprehensive, keep to the districts, the priorities for the district that we talked about. And I would anticipate, I'll just say, I would anticipate that the community will probably be going out for another bond in 4 years for additional classrooms and maybe some other things. And then another 4 to 6 years after that for new elementary school. But you really want to avoid bond fatigue for the community if you were going out every year and doing this little project and that little project. So,
When was the actual last one? Was it like 91?
the bond, we did several for the high school.
Right.
So 2011 was the main one, and then we turned around and did an additional one in 13. So we did a couple back-to-back just to finish this campus. Not to go into a lot of detail, but the timing for this high school was pretty amazing, right?
Yes.
The costs were much lower than what we expected. The bonding, the interest on the bonds was about low as you can get. And this was actually put out as an additional component. What do we call that for a bid?
Alternate.
An alternate. And when we got the bids back, we said, wow, we not only can put the shell in, but we can go a long ways in filling the auditorium in. So we went ahead 2 years later and finished the locker wing and did the outdoor facility so that we didn't have kids from high school going over to the intermediate school. So it was 2011 and 2013. Now we're talking about one in 2018, and I would guess that would probably be the appropriate timing for the 8th fastest growing district in the state of this size. Waukee goes out and does one every 18 months, but they're building a new building every 18 months. So,
In our bond council, when we talk to them about, as we're looking at going out and do we have the financing and how we should look at this, they really, as Tyler said, they really caution us about not going out and every other year doing a bond. People say, well, where are you looking at this in a proactive, or are you just reacting? And that's why we're trying to look at this and look at it as a proactive approach with the growth that we have. One more, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up on the last question, where kind of, the people in the district, their priorities might be different. They might not support the athletics, they might support the fine arts. So I do understand that question. It might be helpful to give us an idea of how much spending, how much of the 14 million is going to 1 and 2, for example, which a lot of the people think are priority, and how many are going to the athletics and the arts.
yeah.
Amy, while he's looking that up, do we have anything on our webpage that tells anything like that?
Just go to the pie graph.
What the breakdown was for what's going for each of the, that's right, that's on that.
So the high school is 38%. High school's 38%, middle school 22%, intermediate 12, elementary 8, and athletics 20. Wrapped into that 38% on the high school is the band edition. And the band room in the middle school is not broken out from the middle school either, but those are the percentages.
So it's a lower part of, it's not 50% of your
No, good point.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Other questions? I'm sorry.
I'm trying to remember that when we last had the big building. Isn't something unique about Gilbert the fact that a lot of our bonds are based on residential, and we don't have a lot of like business, where maybe someplace like Waukee or some other towns have a lot of businesses that are included in their evaluation?
Yep, so Deb's comment, if people didn't hear, is the makeup of the valuation for our district is different than many because we have very little commercial valuation. So we get some more fairways and some more of that stuff coming north of Bloomington Road, that'll start coming. But right now it's almost all residential and some agriculture. And that, I'd say we've done very well for a district. I heard stories, Lindsay Ellingson, before he passed, would tell stories about how 25 years ago the district almost had to fold or be absorbed by another district just because of that issue, right? And so I'd say the board and the administrative team, well before I got on, did a nice job of that balance. We've got more valuation coming. It's almost all from housing, but the more commercial that comes in, that's valuation that doesn't also have children with it. So that will allow this 1890 that Lindsay talked about. When we get commercial valuation, that can come down. Because if you look at Ames, 14 or 15, I think, is their levy. We've really been between 17 and 20 since I've been watching. So we need commercial valuation in order for that to really go down. To me, I'm as a parent and living in this community and being in the district, I guess I moved in with the mindset that that's going to be our levy rate because that's where we live. But that's a good point. Any final questions? Yeah, there's the pie chart. So the one on the left will show you breakout by building, and the one on the right by category. Good.
I was just curious, how much have we been creative in how we're using the space that we have? Like, I know something that's come up in different meetings I've been at is teachers don't have to be assigned a room. They could have a pooled office space for them to do work, and we could be using those classrooms more effectively. And maybe taking one of those classrooms and expanding it into a science room or whatever, an additional fine arts classroom or something, I don't know. How much have we done that? And if we haven't, why? And shouldn't we still be doing that, even if we're going to do the expansion? Don't we still need to do that? Creatively use the space we have because we are a growing district. And so I see these two initiatives needing to move alongside each other. And are we waiting for this to happen so we don't have to do that? And those are all my questions.
Tyler cleverly handed the mic to me on this one. I don't know. Here's my spin on that. I think that we try to, and I know that we have at least one teacher in the audience, so I'm not going to pick on you, but maybe I will pick on you. The fact of it is we try to share classrooms now if there's availability. I understand what you're talking about. It's almost like the college concept that they have where at Iowa State that they have an area. Here's an area where all the professors are at. And they may go into classroom A or B or C, all right? And it isn't necessarily Mr. Jones's class or Mrs. Smith's class. It's just a classroom. I think that we're trying to go ahead with what we have right now and to use those as efficiently as possible. But when we have some of the class sizes that we're dealing with, and when we're trying to look at breaking these out, we need to have more space. I mean, I don't know how to say that in any other way, Marcia, but the fact that I think that your question is good. I think that we should be looking at any time of how we can share that. I've been in districts where they have, they call it art on a cart. And what happens is it's down to this end or it's down to that end. The biggest thing is I want to make sure that we are offering what we can to our students in the best possible way. And I'm not saying that we have to have the Cadillac of anything. I'm just saying that I want to make sure that we are offering the things that we need to. And when I hear the high school talking about, well, do you realize that we're looking at sections of this size? I said, well, can't you just move those around a little bit? Well, they tell me it's not that easy, and it isn't. I mean, if you've had kids that have gone through the high school, same thing at the middle school. And so I would say that we will try to, as administrators and as the overall district, try to look and be as efficiently as possible. But I think that if we don't get something to look at as far as some of these areas to expand on, we're going to be full to the rafters, and we're going to be saying, well, how are we going to do some of these different things? Your question is a good question, though, and I think that we need to be very prudent as we're looking at that.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Now that he plowed the ground.
Yeah.
So we've had those discussions too, Marcia, at the board level, and the conversation is, well, to do that, which would primarily be the high school, because that's not going to be really the way you do an elementary and intermediate, probably not in middle school, but primarily the high school. I'd say two things. We've had that conversation. What that will take, if we go that route, is an investment in some office space. So you can't just kick the teachers out. But we've had that conversation. That's not something that we decided to do on this round. That's something that could be decided to do on the next round, and I think it's something that should continue to be revisited. What we decided to do was put that onus back on the administrative team, and it's primarily the high school, so primarily Vic, who's doing a great job, but working Vic with Lindsay and saying, okay, how are we using the high school? And I think we've seen, Deb can attest that we've already seen some advancement there with the usage of classrooms with Vic. Vic Vanderpool's the new principal in the high school, if you haven't met him, and I expect that they'll continue to use the current space effectively, but that is a conversation that needs to continue to happen. But when that happens, there's an investment in office space. It doesn't come free.
Maybe an example of, you had mentioned, Lindsay, on one of the slides, the current use or future use, projected use, and adapting, being adapted. I forget the descriptive use, but 21st century. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you could give us an explanation of what that looks like, different than what it is now.
I'm gonna date myself, and when I was in school, basically there was a situation, Lance, where there was a teacher at the head of the class. There were desks that were in rows, and the teacher was out there basically the knowledge and spewing that knowledge out to all of the students, and they were there absorbing that. As we look at 21st century learning, there's a lot of variety of what we can look at. We've looked at some different things. I know Sadell is one of the schools that has done some things with HALA as far as 21st century learning. There's some flexible seating type of things that you can do rather than, not everyone is conducive to sitting at a desk in a straight row and doing the tasks that's given. We've looked at the opportunity where on the walls where they might be having smaller projects, smaller group projects, and they'll be having actually whiteboard areas where they can go ahead and do some of their figuring and working together in groups. I know in your business, you guys are always working together, and you're trying to make sure that people are working together and that that's a task that they can do. We want to make sure that we're working with our kids to be able to do that. We're talking about there's some different types of technology that we can go ahead and use rather than just to have the computer like it's set in on the card here. We can have some different things that are spread around the room where that might be built into the overall aspect, and kids can go ahead and let's say that we're working on an overall project and they can go ahead and be a part of that. It's a different look. It's not a box and desk. And I think that and I don't have all the answers to that, by the way. I don't want to try to. I know that some of our different principals have looked at different things. My point is that I want to make sure that we're just not doing, I heard people say, well, are you going to build a building and have it be a 1970 style building? No, that's not what we're looking at. We're trying to make sure that we have the opportunities there for those kids. And maybe if we want to sit down and we can talk about some of those other different things that we would have that would be 21st century learning. But I had some people talk to me already about, are you looking at 21st century learning? I said, yes, we are. They said, I'll tell you what, we would love to talk to you. And this wasn't a salesperson. This was someone in our actual community about the fact of being able to go ahead and look at some of the different things that are out there. I hope I answered that. I didn't do a great job of answering that, but I would be happy to sit down and talk to you about that or show you some of the different things that are out there. Deb, do you have something?
I guess when I thought of it and when I saw the architecture plans, think of a flexible space. So a bigger room that might be able to become 2 rooms if it needs to be. Or collaboration spaces is another word that you'll see a lot. So instead of the desks, maybe you have small tables, areas where people can work in small groups. Obviously the technology piece that you described, but it's really that, the flexibility of the space. And it's not just set with a, here's the door, here's the front of the room, here are the the students all facing forward. It's
Well, and you've done that, like at the middle school, when they built the middle school, they have collaboration.
You're exactly right, yes. And you would do the same thing, Lance, I think, when you, at principal, you guys work in a collaborative group and trying to teach that. That's one of the things that we want to mention.
My point not to just explain to me, Dylan and live it, I think, probably.
Yeah, you probably do.
Because the principal things are, it's very flexible today, and that's how they're building it differently. And that's why I asked the question. I understand what it's like in our world. In the classroom, I've seen it, but I didn't know the group here. And one of the prior questions that was asked, that maybe could shed some light on what's happening on flexibility versus space and how it's changing.
Amy, can you bring up the middle school from the website? Because that would show you exactly what Deb was describing, which is instead of just hallways, those can actually collapse into small group areas, right? And so they're basically built such that it's not just a hallway in a classroom, but there's actually some collaboration space. Okay, that's not really easy to see. There you go. So if we had a pointer, well, you can show it right above those classroom rooms. There's space, right? Yeah. So there's that small group. It's not just classroom. It's not just hallways, but small group 5, small group 6. So there must be 8 of them in that area. And that middle school is already built that way somewhat. But we're saying, well, they'll just slam 4 classrooms in there, create some space around them. And so the idea, I think, for the teachers is, well, then they can take a small group and go out and use one of those spaces while they're still teaching, and it starts leveraging their ability to focus, right? So that would be an example in the middle school, and the example in the high school is really, it's project-based learning, which John Davis is just leading the way there with all of the different things he's doing, right? And so a lot of the additional space is driven around some of that flexibility, whether that's vocational or there's art and such, and that's going to be much more adaptive to what they're doing rather than just, again, a square room with 25 chairs.
Other questions? Yes, sir?
Quick comment. It's not a question. This is a plug. I'm part of the Vote Yes Committee. We're not constrained by the law. We can say vote yes. Ryan would have helped Ryan and Carol for helping. If you want a yard sign, I'll be here afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, question?
The other answer is there are absentee ballots on your site, and you can get them. I think they're on Tuesday, you can do an absentee ballot, but whichever way you will go.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's a good point too. We're trying to pack as many things on that website as possible, and I've had people say, you got to realize that people don't always like to look at things that are on a website. So you're going to get a postcard that's going to be coming out that's a reminder on the date and things like that. We have a communications meeting tomorrow night, and we'll probably try to refine if there's some other things that we need to put out there. Different people have different, just like kids, different kids have different learning styles. Different adults have different ways that they like to receive their information. And we're just trying to make sure that we get that information out to you as much as possible. And if there's a question that's out there that we didn't answer or something that we didn't get to you, let us know, because that's our job. At least that's my job. That's my job, to make sure that you have all the information that you need, so when April 3rd comes, you can go in and vote however you'd like to vote. Any other questions? Thank you very much for taking the time to come tonight. We greatly appreciate it.